A poor girl found herself sent on a blind date in place of her sister, a date with a single-dad CEO who wouldn't let her leave. Outside the window, snow drifted down in soft, swirling patterns, gracefully dusting the porch and blanketing the entire world in pristine white. Inside the cozy home, however, a palpable tension hung heavy in the warm air. Linda stood quietly in the living room's center, her fingers nervously entangled in the hem of her sweater as her stepmother Jessica cut through the silence with a sharp, insistent voice. "You'll go in Chloe's place," Jessica declared, her tone clipped and cold. "He's a crippled single father, divorced, and likely has nothing. Chloe simply cannot be seen with someone like that." Linda's breath hitched in her throat. "But I don't even know him," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jessica crossed her arms, a dismissive look on her face. "Exactly. You just need to sit there, offer a polite smile, and then leave. No drama, no complications." Linda, still hesitant, quietly asked, "Why not just cancel the date?" Jessica's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Because he was introduced through someone important. If we back out now, it reflects badly on Chloe. I won't let your sister's name be tied to a broken man and his child." Linda looked down, a wave of resignation washing over her. "So I'm the backup plan," she murmured. Jessica tilted her head, a chilling smile playing on her lips. "You're useful." That single word struck Linda with a force far greater than its simple utterance. "You live here, don't you?" Jessica pressed, stepping closer, her voice laced with accusation. "You eat our food, sleep in our home, or have you perhaps forgotten what this family has done for you?" Linda offered no response. Every word, "our food, our home," was not a reminder of affection, but a heavy burden of debt. She turned to her father, who stood a few steps behind Jessica. His shoulders sagged with what looked like an immense weight. His eyes met hers for only a fleeting moment, filled with a raw, undeniable guilt, then quickly darted away. His lips parted as if to speak, but no sound escaped. "Dad," she whispered, a plea in her voice. Still nothing. That night, Linda stood before the mirror in her small, cold room. Her blonde hair hung loosely past her shoulders, framing eyes that held a tired, deep sadness, a sorrow that had settled long ago and never truly departed. She pulled on the only dress she owned that could remotely be considered formal, a light blue gown, slightly faded with frayed seams near the hem. It had once belonged to her mother. It was too loose on her now, but at least it was clean. Outside, the snow continued its gentle descent. Under the lonely glow of the street lamp, flakes danced like delicate feathers caught in the wind. She wrapped herself tightly in her second-hand coat, stepped out into the biting air, and began her walk to the train station. The ride was quiet, almost eerily so. Her reflection stared back at her from the window, blurred and uncertain, mirroring the turmoil within her. Downtown, the sidewalks were muffled by the fresh layer of snow, absorbing all sound. Streetlights shimmered, casting a soft glow. Her boots crunched gently with each step as she made her way to the cafe, a charming corner shop still adorned with leftover holiday lights, radiating a welcoming warmth. As Linda approached the cafe window, her steps instinctively slowed. He was already there, Lucas. He sat upright, dressed impeccably in a charcoal coat over a crisp, neat shirt. His dark hair was meticulously brushed back, though a few unruly strands had fallen loose across his forehead. With familiar, careful hands, he gently adjusted the brace on his left leg. Across from him sat a young girl, undoubtedly his daughter. Her legs swung playfully beneath the table, a crayon clutched in her small hand. She was deeply engrossed in drawing on a paper placemat, her brow furrowed in earnest concentration. There was a delicate quality to her face, a quiet hint of loneliness that Linda immediately picked up on. Linda's heart clenched with a strange mix of emotions. Lucas didn't appear desperate, nor did the little girl seem like a burden. Instead, they looked like a story still unfolding, quiet yet undeniably alive. Her hand hovered at the door, a fleeting thought of escape crossing her mind. She could walk away, pretend she had never been here. This wasn't her world. She was merely a stranger sent on someone else's errand. But then, Jessica's voice echoed sharply in her mind, cold and final. "Do not mess it up. You owe this family." Linda stood frozen for another second, caught between her instinct and her obligation. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she pushed the door open. A soft bell chimed, announcing her arrival. Warmth enveloped Linda instantly as she stepped inside a comforting blend of cinnamon and coffee, scents accompanied by the gentle hum of quiet conversations. She brushed the melting snow from her sleeves and slowly directed her gaze toward the table. Lucas looked up, and their eyes met. His gaze was steady, filled with curiosity, yet utterly devoid of unkindness. Linda, who was never meant to be there, who wasn't even supposed to be seen, found herself walking forward with a newfound certainty, not turning back. It was intended to be just one blind date, but somehow in that moment, it already felt like something far more profound than she was ready to admit. The cafe's cozy warmth wrapped around her like a blanket she wasn't sure she was allowed to keep. Her fingers fidgeted nervously beneath the table. Across from her, Lucas offered a calm, reassuring smile, his posture composed and relaxed. "I'm glad you could make it," he said gently, his voice soft. Linda opened her mouth to reply, then hesitated, her throat suddenly feeling tight. She glanced down at the menu, but the words blurred and swam confusingly on the page. "What's your name?" Lucas inquired, his tone kind and patient. Linda's fingers curled tightly into the edge of the tablecloth. She took a shaky breath, then quietly confessed, her eyes lowering, "I'm not Chloe." A profound silence followed, a quiet, expectant space where the truth hung, waiting to be fully received. "I came because someone had to," she added, her voice barely a whisper. Lucas didn't react with shock or frustration. Instead, he simply tilted his head, studying her with a thoughtful, curious expression. "Why would you show up for someone else's promise?" he asked, his voice still gentle, inviting her to explain. Linda's hands trembled slightly, and she murmured, "I should go." But before Linda could even begin to stand, a small hand reached across the table and gently yet firmly clasped hers. It was Grace. The little girl looked up, her eyes wide, serious, and utterly captivating. "Don't go yet," she pleaded softly. "I like your hair." Linda froze, a rush of unexpected emotion washing over her. Grace had turned fully toward her now, her crayons completely forgotten. A gentle softness radiated from the child's face, an unspoken quiet yearning that Linda recognized instantly and deeply. And so she stayed. When the server arrived, Linda simply requested, "I'll just have water." Grace scooted even closer, her messy brown curls tumbling charmingly into her face. Without a second thought, Linda instinctively pulled a ribbon from her coat pocket. "May I?" she asked gently, her voice barely a murmur. Grace nodded eagerly. Linda leaned in her fingers, moving with careful, practiced grace, as if remembering a long-forgotten skill, and began to braid Grace's hair. She tied the end neatly with the ribbon. "There," she whispered with a warm, soft smile. Grace immediately touched the braid, her face beaming with delight. "Pretty," she exclaimed. Then a light, sudden peal of laughter echoed through the cafe, a sound so joyful it seemed to fill every corner. It was the first time Linda had witnessed Grace truly smile. Lucas, who had been silently observing the entire interaction, felt a warmth spread through his chest, something long held finally beginning to loosen. His fingers hovered over his untouched coffee cup. "You're good with her," he said quietly, a hint of admiration in his tone. Linda shrugged slightly, a modest blush on her cheeks. "She's easy to love," she replied, her gaze softening as she looked at Grace. Lucas nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on his face. He then asked a few more gentle questions. Nothing too intrusive. He inquired about her thoughts on the city, her musical preferences, and the types of people she admired. Linda answered simply and honestly, not attempting to charm him, but merely speaking her truth. "I think kindness shown when no one's watching matters more than being admired when everyone is," she said softly. Lucas found himself listening intently, speaking less and observing more. He watched her hands as she instinctively helped Grace pick up a fallen crayon, and the unconscious way she leaned slightly toward the child. Then he noticed her posture tense, as if she were perpetually ready to leave at a moment's notice. Without a word, Lucas leaned down and gently nudged her chair forward, adjusting it to bring her closer and make her more comfortable. Linda blinked at him, clearly surprised by the small gesture. He offered a slight tender smile. Their eyes met, and in that silent exchange something unspoken yet profound passed between them. Linda looked away first, not from discomfort, but from a depth of feeling she wasn't sure she could fully comprehend. Grace, proud of her creation and deeply focused, then pushed a drawing across the table. It depicted 3 stick figures standing under a tree, a tall man, a woman with long hair, and a small girl in between with a ribbon in her hair. Linda's breath caught in her throat. "Is that us?" she asked softly, her voice filled with wonder. Grace nodded, a bright spark in her eyes. "It's today," she affirmed. Lucas looked down at the heartfelt picture, then up at Linda, who was now tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear, a faint tender smile gracing her lips. In that quiet moment, a profound realization dawned on him. The woman who had come pretending was in fact the first person who hadn't pretended at all. And he didn't want her to leave. Not yet. Maybe not ever. As the afternoon slowly wore on, the cafe gradually began to quiet. A soft hum of background conversation lingered, but at their intimate corner table, a distinctly different kind of silence had settled, one that was comfortable and gently reassuring. Grace was now completely at ease, sitting contentedly beside Linda, her small fingers idly tugging at her braid as she admired it in the reflection of a spoon. She had pushed her drawing aside now, tracing simple shapes with her finger on the wooden table, giggling softly when Linda joined in, tracing alongside her. Lucas watched them, not merely observing, but watching closely and carefully. He noted the way Grace leaned trustingly against Linda's side, how her tiny hand occasionally reached up to grasp the fabric of Linda's sleeve, how her smile was wider now, no longer guarded, how she looked truly seen. Something profound stirred in Lucas's chest, bringing with it a wave of memories, ones he had carefully shelved behind the daily routines and overwhelming responsibilities of his life. He briefly looked away, his gaze drifting toward the window where soft, slow flurries of snow still drifted gently down outside. It had been just over 4 years since the accident. The crash had come out of nowhere, a truck on black ice. A sudden swerve, screams, and the shattering of glass. Lucas had survived suffering a fractured leg and some nerve damage, making the brace a permanent part of his daily life. But the true deep wound was not in his bones. His wife had visited him only once in the hospital. She had arrived in silence, left a folded paper on the windowsill with a signature already scribbled on the bottom line, and then she never returned. Grace had just turned 1, barely walking, not yet talking, and suddenly she was entirely his. Lucas had held her that first night home, both of them still a little broken, and promised the ceiling he would figure it out. He would try even if he had no idea how. Since then, it had been just the 2 of them against the world. Diapers, fevers, cherished storybooks, tears in the night, tentative first steps, and precious first words, all had been witnessed by him alone. He never complained, for he simply didn't have the time or energy to do so. Yet he had never expected to witness the sight before him now. His daughter curled up contentedly next to a woman she had met only hours ago, her head resting softly against Linda's arm. Eyes fluttering gently closed, lulled into a sense of profound safety. Linda, with slow, rhythmic care, brushed a gentle hand through Grace's hair. She said nothing, offered no forced smiles, and made no effort to impress. She simply stayed, her presence a quiet anchor. Lucas blinked, a sudden tightness in his chest. "She says you're funny," he murmured, his gaze directed toward the sleeping Grace. Linda smiled softly, a genuine warmth in her eyes. "She's a better judge of people than I am," she replied, a hint of humility in her voice. There was a comfortable pause. Then Grace's tiny voice softly broke the quiet. "Mommy went to the sky," she said suddenly, her words soft yet certain. Linda's hand stilled for a moment as she gently turned toward the little girl. "Oh," she murmured. Grace nodded against her shoulder. Daddy said she's not coming back, that she had to go far, far away." Lucas looked down, his jaw tense. He had never known how to explain abandonment to a child, so he had chosen the only words that could convey the truth without utterly shattering her young world. Linda didn't ask questions. She didn't push. Instead, she simply held Grace a little closer, one arm draped gently around her shoulders, as the little girl began to drift off again, her breathing slowing into a peaceful rhythm. They stayed like that for a while, a quiet tableau. No one felt the need to say much, nothing needing to be expressed. Eventually, they rose to leave the cafe. Outside, the snow had thickened considerably, blanketing the sidewalk in a pristine, powdery hush. Lucas stood by the door, making small adjustments to his coat and brace when he turned to see Linda. She was cradling Grace tenderly in her arms. The little girl had fallen completely asleep, her cheek pressed against Linda's shoulder, her arms wrapped securely around Linda's neck as if she had always belonged there. Linda didn't seem to mind the weight. She held her gently, securely, like someone who intuitively understood what it meant to carry something fragile and precious. Lucas froze, a profound stillness overcoming him. That image, his daughter sleeping so peacefully in the arms of a woman who had arrived under false pretenses, felt too tender, too utterly significant to fully comprehend at once. He stood there a moment longer than he intended, watching, not because he doubted what his eyes were seeing, but because somewhere deep and unspoken within him, he knew this was a moment he would forever remember. Something profound had shifted, not just in Grace, but irrevocably in him too. Linda said nothing as she stepped back into the cold hallway of her home that night. The few flakes of snow on her shoulders had barely begun to melt, yet her cheeks still retained the faint, lingering warmth of Grace's sleeping breath. She closed her bedroom door quietly behind her, plunging the small room into darkness and silence. She slipped off her shoes carefully, hung up her coat, and sat on the edge of her bed, her hands resting motionless in her lap. She told no one about the date, not about the child, not about Lucas's quiet, understanding eyes, and certainly not about the way something deep inside her had softened for the first time in years. She folded the memory away like something precious and fragile, hidden deep within the secret drawer of her heart. For a few days, life continued its usual rhythm. Linda went to work at the small diner near the station, her hands busy wiping counters and clearing dishes, though her mind often wandered. Then the inevitable happened. Jessica burst into the kitchen like a sudden storm phone clutched in her hand, her eyes wide with a tempest of fury and disbelief. "I just heard from Mary Ann," she hissed, her voice barely contained. She saw him at a private luncheon. The man, the one Chloe was meant to meet. Linda froze at the sink, her sponge suspended mid-air, a knot forming in her stomach. Jessica's voice sharpened, cutting through the silence. "He's not some nobody. He's Lucas Ward. The Lucas Ward, a startup investor, a quiet billionaire. He has a daughter, yes, but he's widely respected. People are saying he's looking to settle down a clean slate." Seconds later, Chloe burst into the room, her voice shrill with panic. "You met him. You sat with him instead of me." Linda remained silent, unable to offer a reply. Jessica's face darkened, contorted with pure rage. "You went there dressed like that, acting as if you were the one he was meant to meet," she shouted, her voice escalating. "Do you even realize what you cost your sister?" "I didn't pretend to be her," Linda whispered, her voice barely audible over the fury. "No," Jessica snarled, stepping closer. "You just stole her place?" Chloe was now crying loudly and dramatically. "I could have been someone. This was supposed to be my way out of here." Linda offered no response. There was simply nothing she could say that they would genuinely hear or understand. That evening, while Linda was busy wiping tables at work, her phone buzzed. A message appeared without a name, just an unfamiliar number. "You were sent to replace her, not to stay. Do not mistake kindness for love. If you go near him again, leave this house. Chloe was the one chosen, not you." Linda stared at the ominous words on the screen, her hand trembling. She could almost hear Grace's laughter in her memory, faint yet bright. She remembered Lucas adjusting her chair without a single word, a small act of consideration. She remembered a warmth she hadn't felt in years. Still, she said nothing. With a heavy heart, she deleted the message, blocked the number, and then slowly she opened her messages to Lucas and deleted them too. Her final text to him, a simple "thank you for today," remained unread. That night she called in sick to the diner. She called again the next morning and the morning after that. The ache in her chest wasn't physical, yet it was undeniably real and profound. Far across the city, Lucas stared at his phone, a worried frown on his face. "Grace keeps asking for you. Are you okay?" No reply came. He checked his messages twice, then again, his hope dwindling with each unanswered text. Grace, meanwhile, had not touched her dinner in 2 days. She refused bedtime stories, clutching her ribboned braid tightly as she stared at the front door as if waiting for someone to knock and bring Linda back. One night the weather shifted abruptly. It began to rain heavy and sudden, lashing against the windows with a force that made it seem as though it hadn't snowed just days before. Grace whimpered in her sleep, her skin alarmingly warm to the touch. Lucas leaned over her, his fingers gently brushing damp curls from her forehead. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open slightly. "Linda," she whispered faintly, her voice weak. Lucas paused, his heart sinking. "Linda, don't go. Please don't leave." Before he could stop them, tears welled in his own eyes, blurring his vision. He gently scooped Grace into his arms and sat down in the rocking chair by the window, her fevered body curling into his chest. And for the first time in years, Lucas Ward cried. His tears weren't from the overwhelming weight of parenting, nor the lingering loneliness of loss. They were for something that had briefly entered their lives and then abruptly departed. "She was never just a date," he whispered, his eyes fixed on the relentless falling rain. "She was the only one who saw us, not just our pain." Outside, the world blurred into a mosaic of silver streaks of water on the glass. And in that quiet room, with a child clinging desperately to fragile memories and a man clinging just as desperately to silence, a love brief unspoken yet undeniably real hung in the air like a name neither of them was allowed to say aloud. The sky was still pale with the first hints of dawn when Lucas pulled out of his driveway, his windshield wipers rhythmically sweeping away a slow, steady rain. The streets were hushed and quiet, coated with the lingering remnants of last night's storm. He hadn't slept, not truly. He had merely sat in the dark beside Grace's bed, listening to her fragile breathing. Her fever had eased, but her whispered words from the night before still echoed painfully in his chest. "Don't go again." He gripped the steering wheel tighter and turned onto the main road, his resolve set. His first stop was the cafe, that small corner shop where he had first caught a glimpse of Linda through the window and where Grace had laughed out loud for the first time in weeks. He pushed open the door, a fragile breath of hope accompanying the soft chime. A new girl behind the counter gave him a puzzled look. "Linda," she said. "She quit about a week ago. Said she needed some time away." Lucas's shoulders slumped visibly, but he managed to press a polite smile, nodded, and quietly left. Next he tried the bookstore she had once mentioned in passing. A staff member there remembered Linda's kindness but hadn't seen her in days. He continued his search, visiting a second cafe, a library, and even a laundromat. By noon he had inquired at 5 different places, but no one had seen her. Then, almost by chance, he passed a small corner grocery store. A modest, quiet establishment, the kind of place people easily forget exists unless they live nearby. Something inside him tugged an inexplicable instinct. He parked. The rain was picking up again, drizzling steadily across the sidewalk as he walked, in his hand gently holding Grace's small one. The bell above the door jingled softly, announcing their entrance. Inside the grocery store, fluorescent lights hummed with a low, steady sound. The floor carried the faint mingled scent of bleach and old cardboard. Towards the back, Linda was bent over a mop, her hair pulled back, sweater sleeves rolled up, diligently cleaning. She hadn't seen them yet. Lucas stood there frozen for a moment, his heart pounding with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Then she looked up, her eyes widening in disbelief as the mop slipped from her hands and clattered to the floor. Her voice caught in her throat. "Why are you here? You should—" Before she could finish her sentence, Grace broke free from Lucas's hand and darted forward, her little shoes skimming across the damp floor. She threw her arms around Linda's waist, burying her face into her stomach. "I dreamed you disappeared," Grace cried, her voice trembling with raw emotion. "Don't go again." Linda slowly knelt, pulling Grace close, her arms wrapping tightly around the small, shaking body. Her own hands trembled and her face crumpled with overwhelming emotion. "I didn't want to," she whispered, tears in her voice. "I didn't know how to stay." Lucas stepped forward, his coat damp from the rain, his eyes rimmed red, not merely from lack of sleep, but from the immense strain of holding back too much for far too long. "I don't care what lie brought you to me," he said quietly, his voice deep with conviction. Linda looked up at him, stunned into silence. "You were the truth after that," he continued, his gaze unwavering. She stared at him, her heart racing, tears pressing at the corners of her eyes. "I wasn't supposed to," she murmured, a desperate plea in her voice. Lucas gently removed his coat and carefully placed it over Linda's shoulders, shielding her from the cold draft that crept in from the open door. "You protect everyone," he said, his voice low and imbued with a quiet warmth. "Let someone protect you this time." Linda's lip trembled, and she looked down at Grace, who was still clinging to her, as if Linda were the safest, most comforting place in the entire world. Then, in a moment that felt as quiet as it was profoundly powerful, Grace reached out her small, innocent, and trusting hand. She took Lucas's hand, then Linda's, and with a simple, pure gesture placed them together. Her tiny fingers curled around theirs, binding them in a spontaneous, childlike embrace. There was no grand ceremony, no need for elaborate declarations, just pure, undeniable truth. Lucas felt the warmth of Linda's hand in his, her fingers shaking slightly beneath his touch, yet she didn't pull away. He didn't speak. She didn't need him to. And in that ordinary grocery store, surrounded by the low hum of refrigerators and the faint scent of cleaning solution, something silent and sacred passed between them. It was a beginning, no longer a pretense, no longer solitary. Just the three of them finding their way back together as a family. The park was serene and quiet that Sunday afternoon. Grace skipped ahead of them, a flower crown balanced charmingly crooked on her head, twirling in joyful circles under the gentle pale spring sun. Lucas walked beside Linda in an easy, comfortable silence. There were no grand gestures, no forced conversations, just the simple, profound comfort of being near each other. It felt undeniably real, and that reality was precisely what made it so terrifying. Later, as Lucas carefully buckled Grace into her car seat, Linda hesitated. She looked at him, truly seeing him, noticing the way his hand lingered protectively over the seatbelt, the way he glanced at her as if he wanted to ask her to stay for dinner, perhaps even forever. She offered a soft, small smile, then gently turned away, a decision already made. By the time Lucas had dropped them off and walked back to the driver's side of his car, an envelope was already lying on the seat. He saw it too late. Her handwriting was neat, careful, each letter formed with precision. He opened it with shaking fingers, his heart sinking with each word. "You have a family to build. I don't belong in something that started with a lie." There was no signature. Lucas read the note once, then again, his eyes scanning the words desperately. He then leaned back against the seat, eyes closed, his fist clenched tightly. He wasn't angry at Linda, not truly. He was furious at every single voice that had ever made her believe she was temporary, that she was replaceable, that she had to earn every ounce of love she received, that she simply didn't belong. He started the engine, driving fast and with fierce focus, his heart thumping louder than the heavy rain now beginning to fall against the windshield. By the time he reached her street, the rain had intensified dramatically. Sheets of water instantly soaked through his coat as he stepped out, slamming the car door shut behind him with a resounding thud. He didn't care about the rain or the noise. He marched purposefully up the steps and knocked firm and steady on the front door. Jessica opened the door, a disdainful smirk already forming on her lips. "I see," she said coolly, her gaze sharp. "So she trapped you after all." Lucas didn't flinch. "No," he stated calmly, his voice unwavering. "She's the only woman who didn't try to impress me." Jessica blinked momentarily, taken aback. "And yet," Lucas continued, his voice softer, yet laced with deep emotion, "she's the only one I remember every night." For a moment, the older woman looked genuinely startled, a crack in her composure. Then her expression hardened once more, and she grudgingly stepped aside, allowing him entry. Linda appeared in the hallway barefoot, her hair damp from the steam of a recent shower, a book still clutched in her hand. When she saw him standing there, she froze, utterly stunned. "Lucas," she breathed a question in her voice. He didn't speak, not at first. Rain still dripped from his coat, and his jaw was tightly set. Her eyes welled up instantly, as if her body had been holding back a torrent of emotion for far too long. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought if I left early enough it would hurt less." Lucas didn't move, just stood there watching her. And then finally her tears came. This time they weren't quiet, polite, or controlled. She wept openly, her shoulders shaking uncontrollably as her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if desperately trying to hold everything in, but she simply couldn't. Lucas didn't pull her into a hug. He didn't tell her to stop crying. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a simple white handkerchief, and gently held it out to her. She took it with trembling hands. "You don't have to earn your place in this world," he said softly, his eyes meeting hers with unwavering sincerity. "Just take it." She looked down at the fabric in her hand, then back up at him, her vision blurred. "I don't know how," she whispered, her voice laced with vulnerability. "Yes, you do," he countered gently. "You've been doing it every day since the moment Grace looked at you and saw home." His words cracked something deep inside her, a dam finally breaking. Jessica stood behind them silent for once, an unusual stillness about her. Linda then stepped forward, just one small, tentative step. And for the very first time, she allowed someone to see all of her raw, uncertain, afraid, but still standing still, undeniably present. And Lucas, he saw her every vulnerable part of her. And he stayed. 1 week later, the sky above was a soft watercolor of morning blues and pale pinks as children began to arrive at Maple Creek Preschool for the new term's opening ceremony. Parents gathered carrying balloons and backpacks, their faces adorned with proud smiles. Teachers organized neat rows of little chairs beneath a pristine white canopy, while the joyful sounds of laughter and fluttering ribbons filled the crisp morning air. Inside the bustling classroom, Grace sat at a tiny desk, her legs swinging cheerfully, a blank sheet of paper spread before her. The teacher leaned down and smiled kindly. "Today we're going to draw our families," she announced. "Everyone gets to show who's in their home." Grace's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. She eagerly picked up a crayon and began to draw bold, bright strokes of color, a tall figure with dark hair, a smaller one with long blonde hair, and nestled between them a little girl with a ribbon in her hair. Above them, she filled the sky with vibrant colors, swirls of blue and gold, and a rainbow stretched wide across the page. Below her masterpiece, she carefully wrote in crooked, endearing letters, "My Forever Family." Out in the school courtyard, Linda stood discreetly behind a tree near the edge of the playground, her hands tightly clasped together. She had come quietly, intending only to watch from afar, careful not to take up too much space. She had told herself it was enough to see Grace happy, to see her starting school, and to know that Lucas was the kind of father who would be there for every precious milestone. But when she saw Grace walk onto the small stage with her class holding up her picture, something profound shifted deep inside her. The teacher gently took the drawing and held it up for all the parents to see. Several people clapped politely, a ripple of quiet appreciation. Then Lucas stepped forward. A low murmur went through the crowd as he walked past the front row of parents all the way onto the small stage. Grace's eyes widened in surprise and Linda's breath caught in her throat. He turned toward the crowd. Then his gaze swept to Linda, and without a single moment of hesitation, he dropped to one knee, right there in the middle of the schoolyard, surrounded by dozens of children, teachers, and a crowd of stunned parents. Gasps echoed audibly around them. Phones instantly went up, and whispers fluttered through the air like excited wings. Lucas's gaze was fixed solely on Linda. "Let's not hide anymore," he said, his voice calm yet remarkably strong. "Will you be her mother and my home?" Linda stood frozen beneath the old tree, her eyes wide with disbelief, tears instantly brimming and spilling freely. She had never dared to imagine a moment like this. Her heart pounded with overwhelming emotion. She took a tentative step forward, then stopped. The familiar fear still lingered. Am I enough? Do I belong in something this big, this bright? Then Grace, with a purposeful stride, stepped down from the stage. She walked straight to Linda, gently tugged her hand, and said in the smallest, most resolute voice, "You already are my mom." That was all it took. Linda covered her mouth with her hand, nodding as tears streamed down her cheeks. She stepped forward, the crowd instinctively parting as she approached the man kneeling in the middle of the schoolyard, holding a simple shining ring. She didn't speak at first, simply looked at him, then embraced Grace, and then knelt too, right there on the grass, wrapping both of them in her arms. The applause began slowly at first, a hesitant patter, then grew louder, and then burst forth all at once. Teachers clapped, children cheered, and even some parents discreetly wiped their eyes. And behind the fence, half hidden near the street, Chloe stood watching. She said nothing, did nothing. She simply stared, frozen, because everything she thought she had lost was now clearly never truly hers to begin with. The wedding was small and intimate, attended only by close friends and a few relatives, held in a quiet park where wild daisies bloomed between the cracks of an old stone path. Grace had carefully picked them herself that morning, handfuls of white petals and golden centers tucked into small glass jars lining the rows of chairs. She wore a flower crown charmingly crooked and proudly held her own basket of petals. Linda stood gracefully beneath a simple wooden arch draped in soft linen, her plain white dress fluttering gently in the warm summer breeze. There were no dazzling diamonds, no extravagant designer gowns, just a humble ribbon tied around her wrist and eyes that had seen too much yet still chose to love. Lucas waited for her at the end of the aisle, his suit neatly pressed but modest, his hands calm but his eyes brimming with emotion. She walked to him slowly, each deliberate step leading her not toward some ideal of perfection, but toward a profound, undeniable truth. After the heartfelt vows, as the guests gathered under a nearby tree for cake and lemonade, Margaret Lucas's mother quietly approached Linda. Her gray hair framed a kind, gentle face, wiser now than when she had first silently buried her own sorrows. She took Linda's hands gently in hers. "You didn't just marry my son," she said, her voice thick with profound emotion. "You healed my granddaughter." Linda blinked back a fresh wave of tears, nodding slowly. "He healed me too," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Later, as the sun dipped just slightly behind the trees, Lucas gently pulled Linda aside. They stood a few feet away from the vibrant laughter and music, simply observing the joyous scene. He turned to her, brushing a wisp of hair from her face with tender affection. "I still remember how you looked that day," he said softly, a nostalgic glint in his eyes. "The snow in your hair, that blue dress, the way you were about to walk away." Linda smiled, her eyes shimmering with a mixture of memory and newfound happiness. "I came that day with nothing," she murmured, "not even a name they truly wanted to give me. But now I have everything I never dared to dream of." Lucas gently took her hand and squeezed it, a silent promise in his touch. Then, with a quiet pride that resonated deeply, he turned to the gathered guests and lifted his voice just enough for everyone to hear. "She didn't just save me," he declared. "She gave my daughter her smile back." A sudden hush fell over the crowd, followed by a collective rustle of movement. Grace, holding a piece of cake in one hand and valiantly dragging a microphone stand with the other, cleared her throat. Everyone turned to look at her. She stood up tall, well as tall as her 6-year-old frame would allow, and announced loudly, her voice clear and bright, Now I have a mommy who hugs better than my teddy bear." Laughter erupted from the crowd. Linda covered her mouth, laughing and crying all at once, overwhelmed with joy. Margaret clapped the loudest, her heart full. Someone quickly handed Grace another slice of cake. And as the music resumed, chairs shifted, and someone accidentally knocked over a jar of daisies. No one minded in the slightest. Because this wedding, this life they were building wasn't perfect, but it was uniquely theirs. It was home. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories don't begin with grand sweeping moments, but with quiet, broken people who against all odds choose each other anyway. Linda walked into a cafe that day, pretending to be someone else, but what she found was not a lie. It was a home she never truly believed she deserved. And in Grace's infectious laughter and Lucas's steady, unwavering love, she finally found her rightful place in the world. Because love, real love, truly heals. Thank you for watching this story. If it touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories, where every story is a reminder that love, no matter how imperfect, always finds a way. We'll see you in the next heartwarming tale.